What's up, SpookBoxes? Look, I know we come across as being really professional on this podcast, but sometimes even we slip up. None of us said like or subscribe anywhere in this podcast. So here I am at the very beginning saying like and subscribe, tell your friends, let's make a whole army of SpookBoxes so that we can take over the horror film critical analysis realm. All right, on with the show.
Hello and welcome to SpookBox, the only podcast where three housemates discuss what's more terrifying, a rabid zombie or an amoral CEO. This week, as lockdown measures are relaxing, we decided to chat with our good friends Nell and Rowan about 2016's Train to Busan. They're also the only people we know who have been to South Korea and presumably on a zombie-free high-speed train. I'm also joined by Daff.
Hey, how's it going, gang?
As always, and Connor will be on audio duty this week. Hi Nell and Rowan.
Hi.
How's it going, guys?
It's all right. How are you doing?
Good. Lockdown still happening. We're all...
Lockdown never ends.
Lockdown never ends.
Never
Billy
ends.
for Soup once sang.
Yeah. Groundhog Day.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to get some first impressions of the movie. How many times have you guys seen it?
Who are you asking?
All of y'all.
Oh.
Daff, Nell, Rowan, the whole gang. Anyone jump in. How many times have you seen this film?
So I saw
We've seen it. Yeah, we've seen it like 3 times. Yeah. The first time we watched it was just before going to South Korea because we had a bit of a kind of binge of Korean and Japanese horror just to educate ourselves. And then the second time was for a Halloween party last year. We did a screening of it with some friends. And then we watched it again last night just to kind of evaluate within the new context of lockdown and coronavirus.
Right? 2020 contagion era. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Daff, what about you?
So I've seen it twice. The first time I saw it was at the same Halloween party because it's back when Nell and Rowan lived here with me. And then I watched it again yesterday. So twice. Yeah, I've seen it twice. My impression of the film?
Yeah, has anything changed?
I was probably paying better attention yesterday when I watched it. It's a weird, it's actually, I was sort of watching it and I was wondering what we were going to talk about today because I'm watching it and I'm thinking, gosh, it just seems like a good movie, almost like a popcorn movie to me. It feels like a very sort of blockbustery, high stakes, very emotional kind of classic story arc with a sort of redemption arc with the main character.
What if I told you that I was doing a little bit of research and the director used to make anime film? Has anyone seen any of his anime?
No.
This was his first live action movie.
Really?
But we watched the trailer for one. Yeah, which
Interesting.
There's a prequel to this film. Yeah.
Really?
So it's called Seoul Station. So it's all based around Seoul Station. And it's, again, just as the outbreak is happening, it follows the story of a girl who's a prostitute and her dad is trying to find her. She's run away from home. And it all takes place in and around the train station. So it looks amazing. It's a cartoon kind of graphic cartoon film, and it looks amazing. It looks quite strange. Yeah.
So do you feel like it sort of adds to your enjoyment of the film then? Well, I guess if you haven't seen it, but do you think it would sort of? Do you think there's any use almost having a sort of prequel to a film like this?
I think potentially I'm not sure necessarily that it needs a prequel or a sequel, which we've discovered is coming out really quite soon. Because I feel like it is the kind of, like you said, Dav, it's just such an enjoyable kind of blockbuster moment. It's so easy to sit back and just watch it and be like, this is a great zombie film. It's so gratifying. All the action, all the shots are just so perfectly crafted.
And I think the what's so kind of great about it and the unique element of it is it's contained on a train. Pretty much the whole film is contained on a train, and I think
kind of going outside of that context, it loses that uniqueness of having it all set on this one moving transport.
Yeah.
Yeah, how I thought it was relevant, I was reading about it and someone said that, like, because he is well versed in anime and anime direction, like the way that he directs the zombies is like quite cartoonish and like graphic at times. So definitely. I think it makes it so exciting. Like, obviously you expect that from a zombie film, but maybe there is like something kind of unique about how he renders the zombies, because he's used to working with like a lot more like playful material.
Yeah,
kind
I guess
of thing.
animated is the word, right? Like the zombies are very animated.
Right, lads. So what we do now is dive into a plot summary, just so everyone's feeling like nice and fresh and what happens. Maybe it'll like spark our minds about something we want to talk about.
Also, it helps me because it reminds me what the characters' names are.
Oh, don't. I've been dreading this so much because I'm pronouncing all of these names for the first time. I have an issue with pronouncing things I've never read before. But in any case, it'll be entertaining for you guys. So will we get going with this plot summary and then we can really dive in on the film? Yeah.
Go for it.
Awesome. Okay, so fund manager Seok-woo, a workaholic father and recent divorcee, neglects his young daughter Soo-an to the point of her asking to spend her birthday with her mother in Busan. Seok-woo sees a video of Soo-an attempting to sing Aloha Oi at her school recital, but without her father there, she succumbs to stage fright. Guilty, he decides to indulge Soo-an's wish. They board the KTX 101 at Seoul Station to Busan. Along with them are passengers such as working-class man Sang-hwa, his pregnant wife Seong-kyung, a selfish CEO Yong-suk, a high school baseball team including Yong-guk and his cheerleader girlfriend Jin-hee, elderly sisters In-jil and Jong-jil, and a homeless stowaway. As the train departs, an infected woman boards, becomes a zombie and attacks a train attendant. The infection spreads rapidly throughout the train. The group must escape to another car, and they successfully lock the doors. TV reports reveal that an epidemic is spreading across the country. The train stops at Daejeon Station, but the surviving passengers find the city overrun by zombies and hastily retreat back to the train, this time splitting up into different train cars in the chaos. The military has now established a quarantine zone near Busan, and the conductor heads the train there. The three men, Seok-woo, Sang-hwa, and Yong-guk, who have become separated from their loved ones in a different car after holding back zombies in Daejeon, fight their way to them through the cars. Once regrouped, they struggle through the horde to the front car, where the rest of the passengers are sheltered. At CEO Yong-suk's demand, the passengers prevent the survivors from entering, fearing that they are infected. Sang-hwa sacrifices himself to give the others time to enter the car by force. A distressed Yong-suk and front carriage passengers demand that the survivors isolate themselves in the vestibule. Yong-gil allows the zombies to enter and kill them all, disgusted by their behaviour and grief at seeing her zombie sister. Ironically, because the passengers had forced Seok-woo's group to isolate, his group remains safe. Yong-suk escapes by hiding in the bathroom. The track is blocked at East Daejeon Station, forcing the survivors to leave and search for another train. Yong-suk pushes Jin-hee to the zombies to save himself, and she is bitten. Heartbroken, Yong-guk stays with her until she turns and kills him. Meanwhile, a flaming train derails, and the survivors Seok-woo, Soo-an, pregnant Seong-kyung, and the homeless man are trapped under a train full of zombies. The homeless man sacrifices himself so that Seok-woo has time to save Soo-an and Seong-kyung through a small hole under the derailed train. Yong-suk makes his way to the working train found by the train driver and throws the train driver to the zombies to save himself. The three survivors board the train and encounter Yong-suk, who is on the verge of turning into a zombie. Seok-woo manages to throw him off the train, but is bitten in the process. He teaches Seong-kyung how to operate the train and says goodbye to his sobbing daughter, throwing himself off the train before he turns. Due to another train blockage, Soo-an and Seong-kyung stop at a tunnel. They continue following the tracks on foot. Snipers stationed on the other side prepare to shoot at what they believe to be zombies. Upon hearing Soo-an sobbing and singing Aloha Oi for her father, they lower their weapons, realising the pair are human. Why are you shaking your head, Taff?
It's just so powerful. It's just so powerful the way she, at the very end, how she starts singing that song.
So powerful.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's so
Man.
sad.
Mm.
Oh, what a moment.
It's quite a nice payoff though, because you kind of see her singing it at the beginning of the film. That kind of song is introduced very early on. And in that context, you know, she wasn't able to, her classmates were laughing at her. And then by the end of the film, her singing is actually what saves the two characters at the end. So it's a nice payoff, definitely. But
That's
yes, very
really,
tragic.
Really good comparing the two. I don't know whether to call the last one a recital, but the two recitals in a way. Because,
I mean, in a sense.
A bit grim. But yeah, the fact that like the first time what stopped her singing was simply that her dad was absent, but he wasn't dead. Whereas her dad is like cosmically absent in the last part, and she still manages to sing. You know, it shows that actually she's had some character growth. Like, I'm so focused on her father's character growth that I didn't even think about Soo-an actually being able to sing the song after everything that's happened to her.
Yeah.
I love melodrama. I just dive right in. So I've got some questions for you guys. Oh, what were you going to say now?
Just about like her character, because kind of Soo-an is she almost like represents this real like the hope of the children for the future, you know, that kind of like typical you know, representation of like children can bring the future and herald the future. Like she really does kind of embody that right at the end, because she's the person that kind of is going to lead them into the unknown, and she
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I want to come back to that. That's something I want to talk about, is like how you read that ending, particularly that it's like a child and a pregnant woman, you know, stumbling to the future. We all love to say like Gen Z are going to save us. So maybe that's why it resonates with us so hard as Gen Y. Well, I've got a question for you guys, and it's only yesterday that I found out through my scant research which is horrendous, but let's bring the education to the people, that in 2009, there was a big flu pandemic in South Korea. Okay. So basically, you can interpret Train to Busan and the kind of surgence of zombie films in South Korea from that point as anxiety about the inability to control the H1N1 virus, which is what it was called. So how has this film allowed us to engage with this scenario emotionally, maybe, in a way that statistics can't? If you weren't aware of that, I get that that's a lot to wrap your head around, but basically there was like a big flu virus. South Korea really struggled to contain it. I think there was like a mix up with the vaccination, different companies bidding on it, so there was also like a delay with providing it. It was just really poorly handled.
People dying?
Yes, and then a lot of people think that that's why South Korea have like nailed coronavirus, because their pandemic preparedness was influenced by having like effed it up before, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So there was maybe a process of like the anxieties of what had happened then being expressed in film, and some scholars who look at South Korean cinema. I can't believe I said all those South Korean names and I couldn't say the word cinema. Jesus Christ. They interpret Train to Busan as a movie firmly in that context. So knowing that, does that like change how you view it at all, or just inform it a wee bit more?
Yeah, well, I also think like I was reading a lot about the kind of MERS outbreak as well in Korea, which happened in 2009, and I think like a lot of the context of that, the bad handling of that, really relates to the film, because most of the kind of like basically the complaints that people had were that the government didn't give out information about like where the kind of areas that the outbreaks were being contained in, like where people were being vaccinated, where people weren't. There was like, basically kind of a consensus to keep people in the dark about it. And this was obviously not a very effective tactic at all. And you can really see this in Train to Busan, like this kind of distrust of government and the way they handle information, like the way they spread it, I think is a really like very pertinent way of looking at that film.
That's so interesting, actually, because like you can see how all the characters are completely kept in the dark. Like, the way that it manifests into a zombie film is pretty quickly.
I'm remembering a scene, a press conference scene, where someone just says, trust that the government has this under control.
But the trust has been eroded, really. Yeah. And also when they arrive at, like, Daejeon Station, which they're told is safe and under military control, all of the military are then zombies. Turned. So it's like, you know, there's very clear... The government does one thing, says one thing, and the result is the opposite.
I think also like the role of social media as well. I think that kind of puts it into context massively, especially with coronavirus as well, what the government is saying and then what people are watching on social media. So there's like a little montage bit where you see kind of clips online of kind of zombies attacking people, falling out of the sky.
The skateboarders.
Getting munched on by zombies, and yet the government is still saying, we've got this under control, they're just rioters. But, you know, it's that contrasting element of fake news and also social media and how people digest and get information these days.
And if you think about the people that are then turned into zombies, they're people that have put faith in what the government have said. They've put faith in their lies, and then that is fatal. And if you think about the zombies, like their biology on the train, how they literally can't see. Like once they go through a tunnel, they're just kind of stumbling about, waiting for the light to like show them what things are.
They respond to sound as well.
They're like jellyfish, I think Connor said when we watched it. Like they're just responding to whatever is going on. And it's the
basic stimuli.
And
I think that really reminded me of, you know, the classic saying of like, what you can't see can't hurt you, and that idea of like plastering up the newspapers to hide the zombies, and that's a way of kind of containing them. But actually just what you're doing is burying your head in the sand and not actually facing the facts that there's a zombie outbreak on a train.
Oh my god, I didn't even think of like the literal newspaper being something that's used to like conceal the zombie and like the truth. Like the news is actually obscuring the reality. That is fantastic.
And in a scenario where they could have easily just chosen like an in-train kind of
magazine. It was newspaper.
I think also
so
like
cool.
that the setting of the train works really well to highlight the way that the information spreads and is contained in so many ways. Like there are parts of the film where there's like a raging zombie apocalypse infection halfway down, like 2 carriages away, and half the people, they are sitting really calmly in their seats and they have absolutely no idea. They're just watching the TV and watching what are presented as riots that are happening out in the city is outside the train, and they have no idea that they're about to be affected by it. So that's so stark.
It is. And then the way that I suppose our protagonist, let me just get his name up, Seok-woo, that's the one. The way that he is trying to teach Suan to kind of distrust people when it's not actually relevant, where it's like harmful. You know, he gives the older lady a seat and he's like, don't do that, you shouldn't do that. Almost like this distrust in the government manifests as like a distrust in everyone, and like quite a harmful distrust that he has to overcome. Just that state of not knowing who you can really rely on and isolating yourself. Like it has this knock-on effect, not just for like the populace as a whole, but even an individual trying to raise the next generation.
He is someone who has to learn over the course of the film not to distance himself from
That kind of leads me into my next question. So are you guys happy to move on?
Absolutely, I'm happy.
It's all linked up. So my research tells me that in the early American zombie cinema, zombies became an important symbol of the working class and also racial minorities in America. In Train to Busan, however, a new complication is added to the formula. By setting the movie on a train, which we've been talking about, we come to realise the rapid pace of the spread of a disease, perhaps reflecting globalism. Can Train to Busan be thought of as more of a disease movie than a zombie movie? What do you think?
I'm curious. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about
I suppose like
globalism.
a disease movie would be like Contagion or that kind of thing, where the zombies aren't really. We're trying to talk about what the zombies are reflecting in this film, and we've talked about like a kind of sheep-like populace, and the control tactics of like a government that are lying to the public. So I suppose that's how the zombies would reflect globalism. Is that the tactics that a government uses to obscure truths and maybe like contrasting truths from other countries to their populace is to lie to them. So I think that there's maybe something in there with how also the acceleration of the disease through a train, you know, we're all a lot more in contact with one another. That also speaks to like globalism as well. Just the setting of a train.
I kind of feel like the focus on containment is such a huge aspect of the film that maybe like the idea of globalism is like, to me, it doesn't really seem to touch on globalism as much. Like even when they're talking about, you know, inside the train and outside the train, that everything's really kept within such a small spectrum of influence. But I think like that point that you made about how fast everything moves is really interesting. And I think actually what for me it really highlighted was that this idea of like disinformation, because kind of from the point of view of the characters that we see and from the start of the film where we join it, everything seems to accelerate kind of almost impossibly quickly. But I think like actually that the whole point of that is impossible, and these things have kind of been gradually happening and escalating. It's just that nobody's been told about them. So like when they get off the train the first time and they encounter the military that have all been turned into zombies, you see all these, you know, there are barriers put in place, there's cordoned off areas in the station, and you sort of have this feeling of like, where do they have the time to do all of this if it's happened on the time scale that we see in the film? And I think kind of maybe the point is that they have been acting on this in separate areas and been trying to contain it without telling anybody what's happening, and that's why it seems so
so the like misinformation is what can make globalism appear so accelerated in a sense. It's like you're not getting the full story, so the narrative seems quicker.
And
so
I
cool.
think like with the context of coronavirus as well, watching with coronavirus, you know, everyone kept being like, everyone was so shocked in the UK when coronavirus came to the UK, but all the clues were there. Everything was there. We saw what happened in Wuhan, and yet the government refused to, you know, take the necessary steps. And then all of a sudden we were in a really dramatic lockdown, and it's if they had been more decisive early on, it would have been a kind of smoother transition. But it was so stark because the government just didn't deal with it very well.
You're absolutely right. What do you think, Daph?
What do I think? I don't know. What do I think about what the zombies sort of stand for?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I keep thinking about the kind of ruthlessness of how the businessman, whose name I can't remember, the older businessman.
I think it's Yeon Sang-ho. You can just call him the CEO if you want.
The CEO. And how he is easily the most selfish character in that film. And his sort of method of defense against the zombie outbreak is to essentially look after himself, basically.
Yeah.
Is that he pushes the... Yeah, go on.
Literally throw other people.
Like the individualism of neoliberalism is definitely in his character. Yeah. And he makes it pretty far, like, let it be said.
He essentially makes it, and then sort of karma comes and just bites him in the ass, really.
Oh, so you think there are these, like, more spiritual forces at play, or at least it's fun.
Figuratively speaking.
No, you know I love that stuff. But do you think it's more that...
There's a spirit, it's called narrative, I think. Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. In the universe of the film, like, we need there to be something other than this like rampant neoliberalism for that character. It's just fun to see him get his like
it's a great payoff at the end.
Yeah. But
I think the way that the zombies are as well, I think you can't say you kind of have to see that it's also adds so much more jeopardy to the film. So the fact that they change really quickly, they run really quickly, it just adds to the drama and is a great, filmic device driving the story forward. I think it's also adds to the fun of the film as well, without reading too much into it. It is just adds drama for sure.
Absolutely. And like the way that they can become show-like and like link up when they pull onto like the train car in the very end. The power of them as a collective is brutal, isn't it? Like once you get all these like just sheep together, they can actually be quite powerful. They can slow down a train. So there's definitely something there. I wanted to talk about like the social commentary, which obviously we'll still be talking about the zombies. I want to talk about the CEO. So what I wanted to ask you guys now was, I think we can say that like the film's offering a social commentary by providing us with character tropes that can be defined as haves and have-nots, and breaking down the social barriers that are normally present between them by way of the zombie attack. For example, the passengers and train crew are so alarmed over the homeless man hiding out in the washroom that they miss the zombie girl boarding the train in the first place. So this seems a pretty damning take on the maladies of South Korean society, and launching an attack on snobbery is great, but do you think the reading is transferable to other cultures, or do you think it's just saying something specific about South Korean society? In this regard, I'll just quickly say that I think that I heard that Parasite's director thought that his film was just specifically a South Korean story about that class difference. And then when it had this worldwide success and won an Oscar, he was like, oh shit, this is happening everywhere. So do you think there's an element of this taking place, which is why it's so well received, like world over? It's a specific story, but we can see those parallels everywhere. Is that something you think is happening?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think that one of the remarkable things about the film, I think, is because I think in the West, it's strange that this film would have become essentially a mainstream South Korean film in the West, but like prior to Parasite, because I feel like when people watch East Asian films in this country, there is an element of novelty around it.
Yeah,
things are different over there. Horror is different over there.
So the average viewer is like putting up a separation in terms of what kind of social commentary is there, and almost like preempting that it won't be relevant. Yeah,
almost. But I think that the remarkable thing about Train to Busan is that I think there is a sort of social critique in there. It does hold true, I think, because essentially it sort of lines up. If you think of main character, what's his name? Seok-woo. As a sort of main character, and then the CEO as being sort of like an exaggerated version of him, or a version of him that if he were to continue
like
being
a future self.
Wow. Being a sort of future mirror, I guess.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.
Definitely.
It does resonate because
he's also like further up the train. He's like in the first car,
he's
like
he's
the future him. I love that,
and it's clear that he has no real people in his life either. I mean, the film is full of these people who are sort of contacting loved ones from far away, but then the CEO only ever really seems to talk to other people in his business. Really, he's what happens to someone that doesn't pay enough attention to the people he loves in his life.
Yeah,
I mean, I think it's interesting though. Actually, at the end of the film, when the CEO is turning, he mentions his mother.
Yes,
and it does add like color and shade to his character in some way. Not a huge amount, I have to say, but it does add. You suddenly kind of have to take a step back and maybe, I mean, he is awful, but humanize him and maybe almost give him a little bit of an excuse as to why he was doing what he was doing. It was because he was trying to get to Busan and see his mother.
It exposes him as just sort of a scared little boy, really.
I think the nature of his job
absolutely.
dehumanizes him. Like, being a CEO inherently, it's like not possible to enter that role and maybe have humanity and heart. Like, the very nature of it itself like changes you. So then that's why these like human elements of him are obscured. Only until he doesn't have to perform that CEO role anymore.
Infected by
Infected. Yes, that's the real. That's all I wanted anyone to say. That's all I wanted.
But then I think I feel like there's a lot about this film that does resonate with Western viewers. I think so. We do recognize that business corrupts and power corrupts, and I think ultimately my main takeaway from this was less about the zombies themselves and more about how that kind of leveling incident or disaster brings out a kind of make or break nature in people, as in you really find out what people are like.
Well, the
during
CEO
a crisis.
panics in a crisis, but the working class man with the pregnant wife is like consistently funny, even under pressure. So it kind of shows like he's almost got like an excess of humanity that's like just exuberating out of him, even when he's under pressure. Maybe that's like a bit of a sort of like reductive viewing of like a working class person, but I still think that it's quite fun, really. I think ultimately that just highlights just how selfish some of the people who do have more power in this film are. I think it just stands to sort of make them seem even more insular, even more humorless, even more selfish, really. Because ultimately the father, what's his name? The working class
father.
Yes. Let me just pull that up.
Well, we all know who I'm talking about anyway. Yeah. Because ultimately he does end up like, you know, sacrificing himself to save a lot of people. Sorry, what were you saying?
Sang-hwa.
Yeah, I was going to say also, I think like there's a really interesting point to be made about like how movement works in the film and how like the obviously in a zombie film, sort of like movement is the central, I don't know, the central aspect of it. There's just, there has to be constant motion in every zombie film. And obviously with the train, there's an added element to that. And I think part of the social commentary that this film makes is about like who, the ultimate power really in this, within the train specifically, is like the power to restrict that movement, and like discussions about who has that power. And when somebody decides that, you know, they're not going to listen to the person who's supposed to have that power, that's kind of when they manage to band together and kind of overcome the zombies.
Yeah, and I think just adding on from that, I think costume, like literal costume, plays a really important part in establishing those kind of figures of authority that you usually would associate. And I think that also is, they're symbols that you can see around the world, which is maybe why this particular film has kind of made it outside of South Korea. Everyone knows what a military person looks like. Everyone knows what a train conductor looks like, or a train attendant. Everyone knows what a guy in a suit kind of means or represents. And all of the and the school kids as well in their school uniforms and the kind of classic schoolgirl kind of costume. These are things that are transferable, and it distills all of the characters into these almost
universal
representations.
tropes.
And I think the zombie element like allows us to distill these kind of very distinct elements of a society down to the essential group of people. And you know, the pregnant woman as well is such a transferable thing. There's always a pregnant woman in a zombie film. What does she represent as someone who's carrying the future literally with her as well? So I think and the idea of costume as well, and I think especially with Seok-woo, I think it's really interesting because he sheds his costume quite literally by the end, and he, you know, at the beginning he's a very clean, slick, suited guy, and by the end he's this disheveled, blood-covered man, and I think that very much reflects his own kind of character arc in a very visual way across the course of the film.
Something else is that, like, I think informed by coronavirus, you know, we see in Train to Busan, like, the zombie attack as a great leveler in a way. Like, everyone's kind of thrown in the mix together, and any kind of, like, class privileges don't necessarily work. Maybe they do at first, but You know, you have to negotiate this ever-changing thing. Whereas in actuality, class privilege and difference has had a huge impact on coronavirus.
Yeah,
like we have stories coming out about the mega rich building like underground bunkers. We have stories about how, you know, people of color and Black people are finding themselves, because of their environment, socially being more affected by the virus. So obviously this is just a very distilled scenario over the course of a day in the film, but perhaps why it's so fun is the fantasy that something could level us all and make us all equal, when, you know, in reality, if there was a zombie attack, the equality wouldn't happen. You know, we would still very much be separated.
Yeah, and I think the disparity would only become more pronounced.
Greater. Yeah. Whereas in this film, it's the fantasy that the disparity would disappear.
And that basically everything just comes down to, do you survive and help others survive, or do you just survive for your own sake?
It takes it back to like, it's like a reset to like this state of survival. And you can either work with people, you can, you know, be this person who's helping others, or you can just think for yourself. It kind of like, it's like a refresher on everything.
Yeah, and even the two suits who are able to like put in calls with their company members who are privy to more information. Actually, that information doesn't help them at all,
right?
Because it's misinformation, and it's it is that fantasy of like money doesn't mean anything in this context now. Like who you are, where you come from, it doesn't matter. Like these zombies do not discriminate, unlike coronavirus, which, you know, it actually highlighted the inequality within our society, if anything.
I wonder if that's actually a flaw with the film. And I think a lot of disaster movies or zombie films or sort of outbreak movies in general,
act as like a great leveler.
Or, you know, that's always often seems like a thematic fixation for these films, is that what would you do if everything was just a level playing field?
Well, perhaps that's what the zombies represent then, is like a kind of eradication of like our class structures.
Yeah, maybe, I guess, yeah.
I also think...
Yeah, sorry, Karen.
I think what you said, Dav, about maybe it being a flaw in the film is really interesting, and I think maybe a bit later on, perhaps when we talk about the ending of the film, I feel like that might feed into what I have to say there.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
well, I want to talk about the ending now, actually. I was just going to ask if you guys how do you read it? Like, is it utopian, seeing a pregnant lady in Seon-woo emerging from the tunnel? Is it a little bit dystopian because they've lost their loved ones? Is it neutral in a sense? Like, I don't know. How do you read it? How does that image strike you, and the fact that, you know, they're the only ones to emerge from this?
It's certainly a moment that I think asks us to believe, to view it as being optimistic, I think, as being hopeful. I think the idea of a pregnant woman who and a little girl who've managed to survive this sort of horrible situation, coming out on the other side just before they're about to be killed. And the way that they're sort of saved is through a song. About meeting again. The Aloha Oi, that's the lyric, is that we'll meet again someday. I think the film is asking us to read that as a positive note to end. I mean, it's a note that says there are more struggles to be had, but eventually we will meet again. We'll come back to a kind of status quo, which depending on how you feel about status quos. I mean, you know, that's optimistic or pessimistic, really. I don't know. What does everyone else think?
Yeah.
I don't know. I find it quite difficult to read the ending, and I find it hard now to not read it in the context of knowing that there's now a sequel
right
and going to be released. Like, I think it's hard to extract the fact that it was also ended in a way that the story could be continued,
right?
Which I think is interesting, and obviously the director is obviously cashing in on the fact that this film did very well and he can make another film.
It's a bit of a cash cow, yeah.
Yeah, I read it as very tragic, actually. And I think, One of the things I liked the least about the film were the gender. It was very gendered, very gender roles.
Yeah.
Very kind of like the men were saving the women, the vulnerable child and the pregnant lady were the ones that survived, not due to their own kind of strength of character, but because they were saved by men. So I
idea
do find that a little troubling.
I think the idea as well of the woman, the pregnant woman, supposedly representing a kind of hopeful future, as just being a sort of vessel for that future, and not necessarily an agent in her own right.
Right, there's not the images as a vessel, for sure. Yeah, it's like an empty image in a sense, like, because it's not really embodied. Like Ryan said, they didn't do anything themselves to reach that point. So,
and Soo-Ann similarly, I think, acts as more of an aid to Siwok's character arc and reading his character arc. She kind of represents that. There's not a huge amount of investment even in them. Like, I think, you really love Sang-hwan, and he's like, you really root for him as the underdog working class man who is the martyr, but it's because you've got really great character development there. Whereas with the two women, I didn't feel invested in them.
Maybe more like for plot development than character development, and maybe in the end it doesn't quite hit because we're not seeing two characters having developed to this end point. We're just seeing the culmination of the plot.
But
I do think there's like something interesting about the kind of dynamic of maybe characters or non-characters. Like as we've already discussed, there's a lot of like boiling them down to their stereotypes, and I do think perhaps like something that I found quite interesting in the film is like the way that they survive really is to kind of shed their individualism and to work and to combine in ways that are like very different from how they would expect to be. So like, this is like seen when they decide not to listen to authority figures, and that's how they survive. But another way this worked really well for me, and one of the images that I saw kind of change and really be central throughout the film was like this idea of family and what composes a family. And I saw like lots of different kind of almost surrogate families developed throughout the course of the film with different characters in the train. So like at the beginning, obviously you have kind of the two central families, which is the pregnant mother and her partner, and then you also have the kind of father and daughter, but they interchange their family members so much as they kind of get peeled off or separated in parts of the film. And I thought this was like one of the things I found so optimistic as a way of persuading us to survive by adapting and maybe changing the idea of what family is and who and what our roles are in society. And I think maybe that, like, I definitely agree that the female characters kind of lack depth, but I think perhaps like a lot of the characters in a way do lack depth, and maybe that's a commentary on trying to think more with a collective mind than with an individual one as resistance.
That's fantastic. I really like that. Like you can definitely read that there's this case for like dissolving your family boundary and like reforming and switching with other families, and it being essential for your survival to like make kin and care for others beyond your little nuclear unit. Oh, I love that reading. I think that's brilliant. Maybe that optimism is like threaded through the film, and so we don't really need that from the final scene itself.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah.
Also, I think that Peninsula is the name of the sequel, if anyone's interested.
Right.
It's set in the same universe, and it's going to be on the whole peninsula of Korea, but it's actually a spiritual sequel, so it's not going to have the same characters. Like, people put pressure for Seok-woo to come back, and the director said, I'm not going to do that. I killed him. So the film is just going to...
I really wanted to see Soo-Ann as like an older kind of...
know.
like a badass rebel.
But he's just trashing all of those characters and starting afresh, but it will be like a zombie film kind of.
So I guess like, one of the things that I would hope for is I've just come off watching a really long reappraisal of the Matrix films by Movie Bob, a YouTube channel.
Yes.
And he talks a lot about how the first film of the Matrix had a clear sort of thematic thread, whereas the second film worked to sort of undermine the initial premise of the Matrix.
That's right. It kind of flipped it.
Yeah. So what I'm hoping is that after all the things that we've talked about family, we've talked about globalism, we've talked about outbreaks and sort of inequality. I wonder, my hope, the idea of this being a spiritual sequel, I'm hoping that the director really re-engages with some of those themes and tries to find sort of ways to refute or ways to sort of amplify or sort of...
Yeah, I think the themes are like the essential interest to him more than the characters and the specific stories. So I think he'll definitely be looking for like novel ways to engage with these issues. So it's really exciting. Like, I'm looking forward to it a lot. Was anyone surprised by how emotional this movie was?
I think, the final scene I think there are two moments that really hit me. One of which is perhaps like potentially more culturally confusing to us as Western viewers, is where the elderly sisters, one of them is trapped to the other side of the door, and one of them is safely compartmentalized in this sort of quarantine carriage, and she, through grief for her sister, potentially through kind of
disgust of the people that she's with as well,
decides to let her sister in, who is obviously a zombie at this point, and kill everyone. But that's a sort of really touching moment, but maybe quite confusing. And then the final scene, well, it's not quite final scene, but where Sok-woo has to leave Suan, and he's been bitten, but he's not quite turned yet. And, they're both sort of sobbing in the front car. It's a lot of crying. Yeah, it's a lot. It's very emotional.
Yeah, that's something that I totally owe Connor like a shout out for this. He explained to me how like melodrama is like a big genre in South Korea. So then like we have this emotional core throughout the movie of Seok-woo being this absent father, and then his character arc is like quite steady as he's like peeling back the layers, but then with his subsequent death it's like really tragic and melodramatic. So I was looking at some reviews of the movie, and a lot of people rate that specific scene the lowest out the film. They're like, it's terrible, it's too much. Do you think it doesn't translate over? I mean, like, it stands out. It definitely stands out.
I am livid.
Are you raging?
I'm raging. Like, I that's my weepy moment. I love it. I cried so much when he remembers.
No, I think the third act is the weakest. I think, for me though, I love zombie films for their action and their entertainment value. Yes, there is the emotional element, but what I think Train to Busan does so well is its action sequences, which are,
agreed,
from in the first two acts. You see some amazing action, and you see the influences of films like Old Boy and The Raid in some of those really high action scenes. And I think the film does so well in creating that world and creating that action, and then by the end when they're all crying in each other's arms, I think it's a bit much personally.
No, I think you've got it all wrong. I enjoy this. The thing I enjoy about this movie, and I think maybe this is the thing that means that I view it almost as a popcorn movie, as a kind of almost Spielberg-y movie.
Is that you get your weepies?
I get my weepies, and I get
your
that I like that, like, I get my what?
You get your Weepabex? Your bowl of Weepabex?
Yeah, I get my Weepabex. I like the redemption arc, because I think that it's sort of it's quite a dark one, because it's so what's his name? Seok-woo's it's the realization that he's fucked up.
He's fucked up.
That he's messed up.
But I think what's done so well is that it's not just this like crying to like make the viewer cry as well, which I think some movies do. How they get the tears out you is they focus on the daughter's tiny Suan's tiny little hand gripping on him. Like we get the mise-en-scène of her little chubby hand. Yeah. And then when he dies, he thinks about her little hand.
Absolutely.
And there's something just about her tiny hand that makes me cry. Like, I think it's the image of that little hand holding on to him.
It's like this.
Like, it works for me.
It's like this. It's like it has this resonance throughout the film, especially in the third act.
It has a universal relevance, I think. Just like a little child's hand being like, "Don't leave."
Yeah, and you know, it's about him coming to terms with the fact that he has failed her, that he's over and over again failed her, even when he tries to save her at the end.
I think he kept a barrier up, like, intersubjectively with her, where he was never present, he was never home, he stayed away, and then with them becoming, like, physically close.
Yeah.
And just her touching him, and the memory that it throws back to is when she was a baby. Like, that's potentially the last time he actually held her.
Yeah.
And just that touch is what makes him fucking crease. Like, he's like, shit, I've missed this. Like, you know,
this is going to make me sound, like, really awful now, but I kind of, like, there's part of me that just really, really wanted everybody to die.
Did you find it cringe?
Through the tunnel and they're about to get shot. I think I forgot what happens the second time I watched it, and again I just had this real gut feeling of like, do it, everybody should die. Because I think like that's the point that I wanted to come back to with Dav talking about perhaps the flaw of the film. Is like that I think that they maybe shouldn't uphold this fantasy that we, in some sort of horrible apocalyptic situation, that we really would like band together and survive. I kind of feel like we need to be like denied the gratification of that sometimes, and I think also this film does, like Ran said, have such good action. I think it just would be like a sick ending. Like,
and also thinking like of a military personnel who's been given a literal order to shoot someone. Yeah. Even like if you're placing that within the context of right now.
Oh my god, they wouldn't hesitate.
Yeah.
Is like, you know, when you're in those roles as military or police, you follow orders, and I think, it loses its. I don't know. I feel it's really authentic up until that point, and I lose its authenticity in the emotional bit.
Because they even have them stumbling along, their silhouette is identical to zombies.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe they just hang on that note a wee bit too long, because we all know that like military have a trigger finger. Like there's no way, they wouldn't have got wiped. Yeah, I think interesting.
It is interesting. I think I'm a fan of. I don't necessarily always think that these sorts of unrealistically uplifting endings to films are such a bad thing, because sometimes I find it interesting when something sort of inconsequential manages to save the day, or manages to act as a kind of device for hope, because hope ultimately in that film is sort of foolish and naive. Because yes, they managed to survive the train, but ultimately they're walking into a future that they have no idea about. Unrealistic, probably, yes. But
you're a romantic.
I am maybe romantic, but I think I do think there's. I mean, I feel as though the film wants us to believe that there's hope, but that hope itself is a sort of naive and foolish thing to have. Despite that, you need to have it.
It's the only thing you do that.
Yeah, and I don't know if maybe that sounds sort of fluffy, but there's something about that.
Yeah, you have to remember as well that film and cinema is used as escapism, like especially in times of real horror in reality. You want to go to cinema and films and escape and see something that you can't see in real life around you. So I can definitely see the value of holding on to some kind of hope by the end.
Yeah.
Certainly.
Yeah, I think there's two big satisfactions for me in the film. It's that like the zombie virus is a great equalizer, and the absentee fathers will like realize they've fucked up and make amends. Like, it's just so gratifying on both of those levels that I think it's very well crafted, because like normally you can come out with like a very upset feeling from like a gory zombie film, but I think it is quite uplifting, and the melodrama is like a welcome addition for me.
Yeah.
Does anyone get any like final points they really want to talk about that we've not managed to cover?
Oh gosh.
I think I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the train itself and the use of that as a set piece and what makes it so special and so different from other zombie films. And I think it adds so much drama. And one of my favorite scenes of the whole film is when they're climbing up on the baggage racks.
Oh my god, yeah.
Mine too, yeah.
Such drama, and you wouldn't be able to get that scene in any other film. You can only get it in this film because it is set on a train. And I think it's and also what I found watching it a third time and being a little bit more analytical about the editing and the cutting of it was the sliding doors within the compartments of literally cutting
compartmentalization.
Cutting people off into certain groups and certain categories, and the editing of all those like slick sliding doors and the sound of it all, I think just was brilliantly done. And they use that, you know, the filmmakers set themselves parameters of being like, right, we're going to set a zombie film on a train, but absolutely use that in an amazing way to create drama and tension throughout. So just wanted to gush a little bit about that.
Gosh, yeah, you know, I picked up on a similar thing. I mean, I think it made me think of sort of going back to this idea of the sort of the novelty in this film. To view this film as sort of a novelty, well, what would happen if zombies on a train? It really runs circles around that idea. What would happen, and how it sort of takes this very mundane sort of environment, something that we're all familiar with. Even if you're not in South Korea, you know what a high-speed train is like usually, and sort of really finding the potential in the sort of minute in that film. I think, it really sets it apart.
They do it so much better than the novelty of snakes on a plane.
That's exactly what I was thinking. That's exactly what I was thinking about, yeah.
No, also, there's so much, actually, like, that I kind of forgot to touch on, which was, like, there's some quite humorous moments in the film.
Absolutely.
Like, the ringtones where they basically distract the zombies at certain points by kind of setting their phones off somewhere else down the train, and like there's all these running jokes about who's got a silly ringtone and stuff like that. Like that a lot. Good.
Yeah, it's entertainment. Great entertainment value.
Great entertainment value, yeah.
Because it's like the whole thing of what would you do in a zombie scenario, and they're so creative with that. The train allows them to be really, really just playful with it. Which I think is brilliant. So, guys, I think we're maybe...
Did we do it?
We nailed this one. We've reached the military camp. We're singing Aloha Oi. We're emerging from the tunnel. We made it. I can't thank you both enough for joining us on the podcast this week. You really added so much interest in chat that, like, I don't think would have been here otherwise. So, really big thank you.
So much.
Thanks for having us.
It was really enjoyable.
Well, let's try and do this again if, you know, lockdown ends or something.
Absolutely, you know? But please let's pick a terrible film, because it's way more fun to tank something. Like, this film was just too fantastic is what I've realised. And we'll see you here again, hopefully.
I guess it's my turn next week. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do yet. I have a couple of ideas.
Okay, can I root for Dark Water?
Perhaps. Yeah,
okay.
We'll see.
Right, well, in suspense, we will wait for next week.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks very much.
See ya.
Bye, SpookBoxers.